Hey everybody, how you doing? Yeah, good to see ya. It's good to be back in Chicago. When I was a young man, Chicago was the big city that we visited. I grew up in Lincoln, Nebraska. So, yep, we would drive 8 hours to come up here and go to the Sears Tower and see all the sights. So, things are a little different for me now. Now I usually just see insides of hotels and insides of conference centers, but I'm glad to see you guys here. What we're going to do today is I actually start with the Q&A. Main reason for that is that the presentation part is a reading, and I'm going to read from Stormlight 5 today, right? Now, here's the problem. I have read from Stormlight 5 all of the parts that are non-spoilery for people who haven't read the previous Stormlight books. I've already done that, everything I have. So this one will be slight spoilers. Well, yeah, more than slight. So that's why I do the Q&A first, because that way I can do the reading at the end. And anyone who's really sensitive to spoilers, maybe you're in the middle of Rhythm of War or something, we'll give you a chance to sneak out so you don't have to hear the spoilers. And that way you can see the rest of, you can see at least the Q&A and stuff. So we will actually start with the Q&A, warning you ahead of time, I tend to go off on questions. I tend to tangent a bit. So I'll be telling some stories and things as we get Q&A. Now, one request. Your questions to me should be phrased in a way as to not spoil any book. This is hard, I know, right? Sometimes if it's just like a minor spoiler or something irrelevant, you can talk around it and I'll get the idea. But there are people in here who have read some of my books. There are people who have read none of my books. There are people in the middle of the book that you want to ask a question about. So, no spoilers, all right? And we're going to do the question and answer from the two mics here, and we're going to let you just get in line, start throwing things at me, and I'll start throwing answers back at you, all right? So, you are first. Go ahead. Yes, yes, there we are.
So good to meet you. Sorry if this has been asked before, but I know for a lot of your books, and for Stormlight specifically, mental health is a very big theme. Did you always intend that, or did it kind of just happen during the writing process?
What an excellent question. So the mental health themes in my books, did I intend that? Did I kind of develop that as it went along? I'll repeat the questions because we're actually going to record this. In case you want to see it, it'll be on my YouTube channel. So I want to get them. I have a separate mic right here for them. So it's a little of both, if that makes sense. But when I was in college, one of my good friends, you can find him actually in Stormlight, Dre from Bridge 4. One of my very dear friends, he eventually made his way to being a doctor in the Navy. He began in psychology. And I thought, I want to be a novelist, right? I think that I should take some psychology classes. But he was in these really cool, interesting psychology classes that they don't let non-majors into. They wouldn't let me register. So I just started going to the classes with him, right? Universities don't like this because, you're supposed to pay, but I was a full-time student, and the professors loved it. They're like, oh, you care? Have a seat, right? And so I sat through quite a bit of his kind of high-level psychology classes where they were really digging into the interesting things. And this is where I started to pick up on real psychology, not pop psychology, and real definitions and kind of real mental health. And as a writer, I thought, wow, so many of us do this poorly, right? So many of us approach this in a way that actually does harm rather than good. And so it kind of made this sort of decision point for me. Was I going to back off from it and just not make it an issue? Or was I going to include it and kind of lean in and try to do best practices, right? It wasn't so much that I'm like, I want to make this a theme. It was more, if I'm going to do this, I'd better do it well, if that makes sense. My wife struggles with depression. And as I was developing the Stormlight archive in particular, one thing that a lot of people say, and then she mentioned this, she's like, I'm kind of tired of stories that are only about that, right? Like, if you have depression as a teenager, you'll get one of these teenage problem novels, they call it. Like, here's someone struggling with depression, which can be really helpful, right? But what they don't give you is, here's an epic fantasy story, and someone with depression can be, in an epic fantasy story as well. And it wasn't that I sat down and said, I'm going to do this. I sat down and said, who is this character? If you don't know the history of Kaladin, there's the first time I tried writing The Way of Kings was in 2002. And I had him be this very kind of more cliched, heroic young apprentice character who wins Shardblade and Shardplate and then has to go become, a shard bearer. And that happens in the prologue. You can read that version of it. It's called Way of Kings Prime. We put it for free on my website. We actually gave a free audiobook of it if you want to listen. It's okay. It's not amazing, right? This is early Brandon. This is baby Brandon writing. Kaladin never worked, which is why I never released that book. It had a different name back then, but he never worked. And it wasn't until I had him make different decisions and I built him into a more rounded character that he started working. And his mental health was a part of that. It wasn't the defining feature, but it was definitely part of it. So altogether, I would say, yes, there was some conscious choice, but making a theme was less, let's make this Brandon Sanderson theme. And it was more, I'm going to do this well. Whatever I do, I want to do it well. So there's your answer. Thank you for the excellent question. Hit me.
Hello.
Hello. Yes, it is quite loud.
Okay, so my name is Simeon. I'm from Chicago by way of Bulgaria. My question is, technologically speaking, what is the difference between space-age Scadrians and space-age Rosharans? And I hope this is not super spoilery.
Ooh, that's not too spoilery. We can do something like that. I probably won't answer it, but it's not too spoilery. I will tell you this. How about this? Number one, I love Bulgaria. Did I see you there when I went to Bulgaria by chance, or any of your friends?
I was here.
You were here, yeah. Bulgaria is the only place I've done a signing where we did it in a mall, and my editor over there is also a DJ, right? All my other editors in all my other countries, they're what you expect them to be. They are people who rarely see the light of day, and when they do, they hiss at it, right? My editor there, same reasons, but it's because he's at the club doing DJ stuff, and he runs this side hustle of publishing fantasy books. So he sat and DJ'd for the crowd, playing music and mixing it during my whole signing. So that was pretty awesome.
I've worked with him.
Yes. So what is the difference between Scadrian science and Rosharan science for the future of the Cosmere? That is a Raffo. However, I have a Raffo card for you. Oh, yes. Becky, you got one. Oh, it's coming over. So that's Scar. Everyone say hi to Scar from Bridge 4. Yeah. When I was filling out Bridge 4's members, I needed some extra characters, and my writing group and friends at the time were like, oh yeah, put me in, put me in, put me in. And so Scar didn't get a choice. He's one of the few people I know who's actually been in the military, so he just went in. He didn't get a say. I'm like, but he and Dre are both military men. Everyone else, they let them choose. And then my friend Ben, if you ever watch our podcast, Ben occasionally makes appearances. He said, do not put me in your book, Sanderson. I know what you'll do to me. No. So he's the only one that's not in there. So a Raffo card. Do you know what one of those is by chance? So, good story time. I warned you. I warned you all. Way back when little baby Brandon was part of the Wheel of Time fandom. Okay? Yeah. Sorry about Perrin in the show. It's not my fault. I tried. Oh, how I tried. Yeah. They're doing some stuff really well. Perrin, my boy Perrin. Tangent time. I'll get back to this. Everybody, if you happen to not like the show, don't rag on the writers and creators. They tried to. There's certain things, forces moving. You can know that Jeff Bezos at one point said, I want Game of Thrones, buy it for me. And they're like, you can't have Game of Thrones. He's like, buy me something that is my Game of Thrones. And there are certain forces at work. Rafe really went to bat for me. I presented a completely different thing to do with Perrin that would still get what they wanted. Minor spoilers for the television show's first episode. But instead of the big event that happens there, I'm like, what if he wounds Master Luhan? He's worried about the rage inside of him. You can get all the same beats without doing the thing you did, and then he also won't be traumatized for the entire first season, and you can actually go on a fun adventure with his friends. And they took it all the way to the higher-ups and fought for my version of it. I even wrote it out for them, and they said no. So it's their show. They can do what they want, but they did the Rafe went straight up with my version. So you know, there's some very wonderful things about that show. Most of them are people named like Rosamund and people like that. And yep. There are some really good writers on that show, and they are working very hard to give you a fantastic experience. There's just lots of forces at play. I'll just say that. So, way back when, Baby Brandon, he's part of the Wheel of Time fandom, right? Wheel of Time fandom was hardcore. Oh, I know. Yes, they were absolutely hardcore. And Robert Jordan often didn't want to answer questions because they would spoil future books. And so he developed something he called read and find out. And if a fan asked him a question that was a little too detailed, a little too, like it would spoil things he's planning, or it might just give too much out early, he would say, RAFO, read and find out. It became one of his catchphrases. When I was asked to finish The Wheel of Time, the first time I flew out to meet Harriet, it's the same day that she gave me the ending of The Wheel of Time, all the materials that he had written. She also gave me something, and it's a bracelet, which I still have. And it was a fan gave us a charm bracelet that said RAFO on it. She handed it to me and said, I'm bequeathing you the RAFO. It is yours now. You may use the RAFO as you wish. And so I keep that at home. It's like there's an actual kilogram somewhere, right? Like, it's the actual RAFO. Whoever bears this is the bearer of the RAFO. And so I printed out cards because I always felt bad saying, no, I'm not going to answer your question. So at least you get a memento of the fact that you asked a very smart question that I'm not going to answer yet. Hello, how are you?
Well, how are you?
Nice costume.
So, thank you, Dungeon Master.
Yeah.
So one of the aspects I liked of the Stormlight archive was Renarin. As somebody on the spectrum, immediately picked it up, and I'm like, wow, there's representation of me. Because of that, I want to ask, when are we getting more Renarin?
When are you getting more Renarin? Oh, excellent question. So, story time. One of my very first attempts at doing this as an Elantris, and I did it poorly. This was when I was starting to take these classes, but it was before I had taken them. So if you go read there's a side character who's on the spectrum, and it's very pop psychology, right? It's basically what you get by watching movies about people on the spectrum before they started to figure out that it was a spectrum, right? And, you know, I wrote that book, and then I wrote 7 others, and I got way better. But that's the book that sold. And I always thought, you know, I did that a little wrong. So I started getting to know people. When I was in college at this very time, I knew several people on the spectrum, but we didn't really have the language for it back in the 90s that we now do. And I started to kind of dig in deep and understand how this works. I now have a child on the spectrum. And I've really been able to kind of learn a whole lot. But the interesting thing is I wrote this before he was diagnosed, right? And so it's kind of cool that I was able to I'm glad I had patient people who were willing to help me do better. Renarin and Steris are the two big examples of me just kind of actually digging into what does it feel like, what is it like, and things like that. You will get the most Renarin you've ever gotten so far in Stormlight 5.
Yeah!
Now, let me warn you, he's not a main character yet. So you read that, he won't get as much as you want until like books 6 through 10. But for now, you're going to get more than you've ever gotten. So there we are.
Hello.
Hey.
My name is Michael. I live up near Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
I enjoy Madison. Good convention there, Sci-Fi Con, right downtown Madison.
Haven't been to that one yet, but we do love the city. So, I'm curious. With the incredible ability bondsmiths have to reassemble things,
Yes.
would they theoretically be able to reassemble Adonalsium himself out of the shards if they were detached from their hosts?
So this is kind of a chicken and the egg question. Would
Okay.
they be able to reassemble Adonalsium? Can you use Adonalsium's own power to reassemble Adonalsium? Can someone externally do it? I'm going to give you a raffle on that right now, but I'm going to warn you, this idea of using something to reassemble itself is more tricky than you might assume. All right?
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Good
you.
question.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Brandon. My name's Flynn. I live in Kenosha, which is southern Wisconsin here.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of the Mistborn books. That's how I got into your series. It's a fantastic piece of writing just on its own. Then I discovered that there were multiple eras, which is a fantastic, one of the most interesting parts to me about it. Now, stop me if this is too spoilery, but in anticipation of the Ghostbloods era
Yes.
that you're writing, you've mentioned that you also want to write a Space Age series, obviously, after that. You mentioned at one point, briefly, entertaining the idea of doing a cyberpunk series in between
Yes.
that, and I just want to ask, what is the status of that? I know it's obviously very demanding, but
So what's the status of that? That's great. So, story time. So, why did I decide to do what I did with Mistborn, for those who don't know? For those who don't know, Mistborn I originally pitched as a trilogy of trilogies. This is because my idea, and I still remember explaining this for the first time to my wife at Outback Steakhouse. Yep, back in like 2006 or 7, back when I was working on the first one. And I noticed that I love the fantasy genre. I consider myself a scholar of the fantasy genre. I've read a ton in it. I've seen how it evolved. And at the time, I'm always looking for what have people not done. I feel like fantasy as a genre, it still has, and back then in particular, had a lot of room to grow. This is because I feel like Grandpa Tolkien came along, sauntered up, released just these amazing books that no one had any idea what to do with, right? Created a new subgenre, and then sauntered off into the sunset and said, do with them what you will. I don't think people, young people today can understand what an impact that had, right? It's very difficult to find anything before Tolkien that truly explores secondary world fantasy that doesn't have connections to our world. And even Middle-earth, you can argue, has a bit. But even things like Conan were supposed to take place in our prehistory, our world. And you can find a few in the 1800s. They're very whimsical, fairy tale-ish sort of things. Tolkien taking that and just wholesale inventing epic fantasy meant that basically all of the 70s and 80s and a big chunk of the 90s were like people scrambling to figure out what he did and trying to catch up. It's like somebody walked into Greek times and said, here's a mobile phone. Bye-bye, guys, right? That's Tolkien. And so I grew up in that era, and there's a lot of fantastic authors doing a lot of really cool things, but it was all very deeply Tolkien influenced, as you might expect. And so as my generation was like responding a little bit against that, saying, all right, what can we do that hasn't been done? And a lot of books have this sort of magic going away because of Tolkien with the elves going away. And so you find a lot in my generation of the magic coming back, right? That's kind of a core theme you can see not just among me, but other writers of my generation in fantasy. One thing I had never seen is I had never seen somebody take an epic fantasy story, a trilogy, and then say that is the foundation of religion and mythology in a modern day trilogy. And then take that and say, yes, and then that's the foundation of the scientific understanding that leads to space travel in a more space opera sort of way. Kind of that whole continuum. You had seen things very frequently with it's a fantasy world that used to be Earth, but you'd never seen this. And so I wanted to do it. It was one of those key ideas, just like I'd never seen a fantasy heist and some of these things. I had not seen people really take science fiction rigor for world building and apply it to epic fantasy. There's just some things that I'm like, nobody has done this, I'd better do it. So I pitched a trilogy of trilogies to my editor. And I still remember his response, Moshe. He's like, wow, you're ambitious. And I said, you have no idea, bud. You have no idea. But I love this idea. However, then the wheel of time hit me like a freight train, right? And it took my career places that I didn't know it was going to go. And it took about 5 years of my dedicated writing time to do those 3 books correctly, which meant that I couldn't get to Era 2 of Mistborn when I wanted to. But what I could do is write a shorter series that was, particularly the first book, were very standalone, that was just more fast-paced, a little bit less continuity-laden, but of course, if you read that series, it goes there. That was after the Wheel of Time was done. So basically, I interjected this middle series because I wanted to be back on schedule, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get there for a while. But then someone very smart, a fan, came and said, now that there's 4 books in the Wax and Wayne series, which became Era 2, and you were planning 9 other books, if you do the math, one more trilogy puts you at 16, which if you've read the Mistborn books is like a very important, relevant number. And I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. If I write just 3 more books. So keep them shorter. Shorter like Wax and Wayne, right? I'm pretty much in my head committed to doing that. That we're gonna have all 5 eras now. So yeah. So that gives us epic fantasy, steampunk, modern day urban fantasy, cyberpunk, and space opera, right? And so, that is currently the plan. Now, here's the thing: I don't want to promise too many sequels because there's only so much writing time. Even though I rebel against that, and sometimes grab a time turner and write an extra book. I can't do that too much or it screws up continuity in our reality, right? You gotta watch out for that. If you use the time turner too much, people are like, but why not save Harry's parents? And things like that, it just is bad for you. So I can't do it, but yes, I'm pretty sure I'll be able to do that. So.
Thank you.
Yep. Yeah.
Hello.
Hello.
My name is Kaylee. I'm currently local. You might remember me from signings in the 2010s.
Back when I was nobody.
Back when you came to my high school and I was a very, very overexcited teenager to meet you.
That is awesome.
Remember me there in Colorado.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so I'm hoping that this question isn't too spoilery. I'm going to try to word it in a way that isn't spoilery.
Circumlocute. That's what we say.
Okay, so you've said before that a certain main Stormlight character's younger brother would have been a Light Weaver. What would his truths have been?
Oh, that's a very deep raffo. So you've got your card.
That's a raffo.
That's a raffo.
That's a raffo.
That's
okay.
a raffo.
Wow.
That's definitely a raffo. I can give you the first one, though.
Oh.
I can give you the first one.
Okay.
He was going to have to acknowledge that he was not the person he was trying to be, but he could be someone better. All right? But I'll leave you there. I can't get you the rest of them. All right, good question.
Hello, I'm Ezekiel from the Burbs.
Hey, Ezekiel.
I don't think this is too spoilery. So in Words of Radiance, you started off a chapter talking about breaths, calling it the life of men. And then immediately afterwards, you had Kaladin bring up how the Alefti are soul-casted into statues. And I believe you said it in a live stream that you can't soul-cast stone. I mean, you
Very,
can't awaken
very,
stone.
very hard.
Yeah, but you can awaken soul-casted stone. So was that intentional?
So it's intentional to get you thinking. Do not expect this to be a major foreshadowing point. Main reason being that while I am, for those, there might be like spouses in here or kids who've come with parents who are like, why are they asking these very detailed questions? I know most of you know this, but all of my epic fantasy books share a continuity hidden behind the scenes, right? This started, story time. This started because back in the 90s, shared continuity was a frightening thing. One of my favorite shows of all time is Deep Space Nine, the Star Trek show. Oh, we've got some fellow geezers here, right? Who like the best Star Trek. Next Generation is awesome. Next Generation has the best episodes of Star Trek, but Deep Space Nine has the best story of Star Trek. Does that make sense? And so you can watch the DVD extras where they would have to take their episodes that shared continuity and hide them from the executives and show them the goofy Ferengi episode about the little bumbling Ferengis doing funny things to distract the studio executives so that they didn't know that there is this giant shared continuity that they were trying to build across seasons, because everyone would have said no. Now, the nerds all knew that this is something awesome, but the executives, and this time the editors in New York, were scared of it because they were frightened that if too much continuity happened, you would start losing readers who didn't keep up on it all, which is a genuine concern, right? Anyone in here been like, I can't keep up on the MCU anymore, there's just too much stuff, therefore I'm not as excited as I once was, right? That's the worry, right? And so to do something like I'm doing, it's a dance. And the dance is to try to make sure each independent story works fantastically well on its own without any knowledge of the other pieces. That doesn't mean I won't bring those pieces in. In fact, I do quite a bit. But I don't want to build big, huge climactic moments based on knowledge of a magic system that is not native to a given planet. If that makes sense?
So we shouldn't expect a statue of the Lopin running around in the future.
I mean, nothing's impossible. But I wouldn't expect it. Yeah, thank you. I actually use this, yeah, give applause. Oh, you have the guitar, good. Yeah, so I, well, we'll just go on to the next question. Next question. Yeah, I could go story time again, but there's actually a lot of people in line, so we'll do questions. Yeah.
Hi, I'm John from here.
Excellent.
I have to pick one of these, so this is the one. Was Chris one of Hoyd's apprentices?
Was Chris one of Hoyd's apprentices? Excellent question. He does not count her in his list, his short list of apprentices. you will find a lot of people he deeply influenced that he doesn't count. And Chris definitely has, and he have some history.
Thank you.
All right, excellent
Hi.
costume.
Oh, thank you. I'm Angela from Chicago, and I was wondering if you have any music associations with anything or anybody in your books.
Good question. So music associations with anything or anybody, particularly my writing, I assume.
Yeah.
Because my wife and I have some songs. She would hate that I say this, but our song is Little Birdhouse in Your Soul by They Might Be Giants. Not your question, but I'm story timing. This is because anytime she has a song stuck in her head, I start singing that to annoy her by getting that stuck in her head instead. So it's a great reason to have a couple song, right? So music associations. I do have several playlists on Spotify, which are the actual playlists that I listen to while working on given books. So if you go to my playlist, Octavia's around, I think it's Mistborn 1 on Spotify. You can find, for instance, my Stormlight 3 and 4 writing playlist, and I would deeply associate a lot of those songs with things like this. I am known, I'll tell you this one. This isn't on the playlist because I try to keep it themed to at least a certain feel most of the time. But any time in the books when I was writing Zeth, particularly when Zeth does the things that Zeth does, I would turn on Daft Punk. Right? Particularly 2007 Alive, their live album. R.I.P. Daft Punk. The robots blew up. Well, one robot blew up. So, yes, but regardless. So there's one music association. If I hear something from that album, I imagine people flying toward the ceiling.
Cool, thank you.
Uh-huh. Yes. Ooh, applause. Go ahead.
Hi, Brandon. I'm
Hi.
Elizabeth. I'm from Chicago. Huge fan.
Thank you.
Trying not to get raffoed, but for the arcanists in the audience, I had a question about Odium's intent, pun intended, for going after ambition.
Okay.
So obviously with Devotion and Dominion teaming up, he didn't want a twosome over there.
Yep.
Are we ever going to learn more about the background on Threnody? Because Chris implies that there was always investiture there before the clash. So I'm looking for a little bit of information about the evil before the Admiral's background story.
Before the clash, the evil was not the evil. Okay? It is the clash that warped it. Secret Project 5 has a splintered piece of ambition as a plot point. Some of these books get, like, if I'm doing like a book all that stuff I said about not having to know multiple magic systems, that goes out the window for things like Secret Project 5, right? Those are books that are about that. They're kind of but anyway, so you will find out some more there. It's going to take me a long time to get to what actually happened with Ambition, why, and things like that. Know that Odium was not expecting it to be as hard as it was, and ended up severely wounded in that clash.
Awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Brandon.
Hey.
Chuck from Chicago. A question about the Stormlight archive.
Go for it.
In the latest book, the Stormfather references a man long ago that made him laugh once. Mm-hmm. Will we ever get a interlude chapter or a short story about the one time the Stormfather laughed?
Raffo.
Ooh.
Yeah, there's your Raffo. Get your card. Thank you for the question. All right.
Hello, Brandon. Chris from Omaha, Nebraska.
Ooh, hey, Omaha. Yeah, eat a Runza for me.
Yeah.
I miss Runza.
My question is, did Ada Nauseam ever create any avatars?
Did Ada Nauseam ever create any avatars? I'm not going to raffle this. I'm going to give you an answer, but here's the thing on this answer. Some of these things are canon in stuff I've done so far that I may not canonize going forward, right? The answer is yes. In original outlines going back to Dragonsteel and things like this, the answer is yes, that you would have seen that. Will I do that when I write the actual series? I cannot guarantee. So it's a tentative yes, but it is not it's not canon yet.
Are any of them still around?
I'll raffo that for you. You're fishing for a card, aren't you? Uh-huh. It's actually really easy to get a raffle card out of me. You just have to be like, so how's the book end? Yeah. I actually usually jokingly say, well, to that one, but yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, Brandon. My name's Josh. I love the world building that you've done in a lot of your books, and was just wondering if you had any advice for if you're playing like a D&D or any type of thing like that, what you would recommend for where to start when building such an in-depth world.
Where to start when building a world if you're a GM building. Interconnectivity. So Sanderson's laws, we should watch a thing on, are more for narrative purposes. If you're actually strictly looking at world building, more important than any Sanderson's laws, I feel, is the Dune principle. When you read Dune, or now we can watch the fantastic films, you will notice that the interesting world-building elements that Frank Herbert added become integral to one another. Your economy, your religion, your ecology, all are tied to the spice in really interesting ways. And that interconnectivity is part of what makes for a really immersive, powerful, interesting world. Now, it can become a one-trick pony, particularly in gaming, right? Where you're gaming, and you're like, and it's also related to this thing. And they're like, of course it is, right? So you do have to watch that. But if you set up and found your world in the right way, you can make everything spin around a fantastical resource or around, a singular event that has huge ramifications, such as the assassination of a king. And you can build out from that and make everything connect together. And why this is so helpful is it is difficult, particularly in gaming, for you to get your players immersed in this huge thing you've built. Because you might have pages and pages and pages, but what they're mostly doing is kicking down doors, stabbing things in the eyes, and picking their pockets, right? Yeah. And you want them to engage with the world building so they get invested in the story, so that when kicking down doors and stabbing things through the eyes gets a little dull, they actually can go engage with the interesting world and story. You need to make easy on-ramp to them to get into that. And some of these hooks, such as everything being interconnected, really give you those on-ramps and help you step them into going from murder hobo to political machinations involved in the actual fate of the world. So that's my advice for you. It depends on your group, as always, with anything in gaming. Yeah. I tried very hard in one of my old famous campaigns to get rid of the murder hobo mentality. But then Dan Wells, who I podcast with, created a character that was like fundamental. If you don't know what murder hobo is, it's a joke we use in the gaming community to reference how player characters in role-playing games, they're supposed to be like fated heroes, or maybe not fated, but the heroes who save the world. They're epic fantasy protagonists. But what do they actually do? They don't live anywhere. They're homeless people who go around finding places to kill things, get their money, and buy better equipment to kill things. And so someone jokingly called them murder hobos, and so it's been kind of become a thing. But I tried very hard, but then Dan built his whole character around the idea of someone who found that aspect fun. It was very hard to get that group dislodged from any sort of such thinking.
Hi, Brandon. My name is Steven. I'm here from the Chicago area. You've spoken at length about like real-world inspirations for Bridge 4 and other characters. I'm curious if you have any stories about the inspiration of Light Song.
Oh, yeah. Ooh. So, inspiration of light song. By the way, I'll probably only be able to get to a few more questions. So I'm going to let most of you sit down. I'm going to take 2 at each one. So the 2, you who asked the question, the person behind him with the beard, and then the 2 of you, the rest of you, I'm sorry. You can't complain, Evgeny. I'm having dinner with you tonight. He's one of our arcanists. Yeah. So I'm sorry, there are a lot of you, but let's get these and then we'll do the reading. All right, origins of Lightsong. Lightsong actually has a pretty simple origin. As I was working, the whole Warbreaker thing book came about from a couple of things. Number one, I had written Elantris and I had written Mistborn, and my editor said, I don't want you to get pigeonholed into doing the same thing. Elantris has this really dreary landscape, and Mistborn has this really dreary landscape. Can you do something more colorful? And I said, oh, you bet I can. I'd already kind of been planning it, but it was kind of funny that he said that. And Lightsong started as a simple question to myself. What if there were a God who didn't believe in his own religion? Right? Where do I go from that, right? And I thought that concept was really interesting. I could dig into it like, someone who is worshipped but is kind of a conscientious objector to the entire religion built around him. And so I'm like, who would this person be? The other thing that was going on is I did want to play with humor in different ways in Warbreaker because I was looking to do some different things than I had done in Mistborn to have a contrast. And so it kind of naturally evolved into Rupert Everett from the Ideal Husband, right? Just kind of suave, jokester, Oscar Wilde-esque person trapped in this whole thing. And I would say those all together are what produced Lightsong.
Thank you. Hi, Brandon.
Hey.
My name is Nisarg. I'm from Boston. I saw you at Dragonsteel last year.
Oh, awesome.
My question is around connections between corrupted investiture on different planets. We have the Shroud, we have Midnight Essence, we have the Nightmares, and we have Nightblood. All of them have like oozy black smoke.
Yep.
Are they all like connected somehow with the corrupted investiture of odium, ambition?
So yes and no. So the question is all of these different kind of manifestations. We've got the Midnight Essence, we've got the Shroud, we've got Nightblood. Are they connected? Are they all related in some way to odium or ambition? So the answer is no to the second. So when I was building the Cosmere, one of the things that I knew is that I wanted to explore magic system really in depth. And in order to do that, I built fundamental principles by how magic investiture would manifest, and I wanted it to be consistent. For instance, I wanted the rules, if you're making illusions in one world, I wanted those illusions to behave a lot the same way that they would on other worlds. And so I built these fundamental principles that I build up from. And one of those fundamental principles is about investiture that is trying to become alive and is being held back by something. And that is where you get Midnight Essence sort of things. It's like one step from being able to become self-aware, but it's being held back. And there's even kind of some frustration in there as much as something not truly self-aware can have. So if you watch for that theme, you'll see that more and more.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey there, my name is Rick. I, funnily enough, just took an 8-hour drive here from Lincoln.
Oh, so, hey, great.
Yeah.
Colby Ridge popcorn.
Yeah.
I actually order that in from my home theater. You can get a big bag of it, so yeah.
I'll make sure I get a runzo on the way home for you.
Yeah.
My question is, I've been standing up with this entire time trying to figure out how to say this. If someone else were to grab a shard, would the god metal change?
Yes.
Okay. That's a really hard to say anything about this without spoilers.
There's a whole bunch of asterisks, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Perfect.
So there you go.
Thank you.
All right. It's as far as I can go on that one. All right.
Hi, in the Cytoverse, you introduced 2 slugs that you
Yes.
didn't go into, and I would really like to know what they do.
So one of them's an illusion slug. Is that one of the ones we've already talked about?
But that was, I knew that one a little bit
Okay.
because you listed it with the plushies. You just said gray slug for the other
Gray slug. So you will find out what the gray slug does in the sequel series that I just finished reading and editing the first book of. So that's a raffo. You can have a card, but it is a promise that it's coming. All right. All right, so we're going to, this is the part where I'm going to talk for like 5 minutes while those of you who do not want spoilers for the end of the first arc of the Stormlight Archive, to make your way to an exit, I will not be offended. I love preserving mystery for people. It will not bother me at all. So sneak on out. Those of you who are up to date or who don't mind, you know, this will have some decent spoilers, but not for book 5. What we're going to do is, yeah, we'll let them sneak out before I tell you what you're going to do. Hello. Hi. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening to me go on tangents. It's one of my favorite things to do. So Stormlight 5. Let's talk non-spoiler about Stormlight 5 for a few minutes. Stormlight 5 is the end of the first arc of the Stormlight Archive, right? I've been saying that since the beginning, since book 1. But then I went and I ended, like, you know, Mistborn, and people are expecting it to end like that. That's not what I mean by the end of the first arc. This is more like an anime arc than it is like the end of Mistborn 1. And I need to start preparing that for people, because one of the things I'm getting from beta readers is, number 1, it's going really well. People are really liking the book. Number 2, they're like, oh, I thought this would be an ending like end of Mistborn 3. No, it's more like the end, like I said, of an anime arc. This is, the end of Stormlight is book 10. You are going to get some decent resolutions on things I've been promising for a while, but you're not going to get resolutions on everything, because it's not the end yet. This has been a real challenge, right? When I work on the Stormlight books in particular, they are very difficult in the best of ways. Because I love epics. I love telling an epic. But the big challenge is making sure that your epic is engaging and not slow and boring, and that you're doing new things within a series, but it still feels like the series. And the way that I break this up in my head is by taking it little chunk by little chunk. So each Stormlight book I plot as if it were a trilogy, right? And then Stormlight, like each of those chunks, are plotted like a normal book with a Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. So you've got like almost like 9 acts in a given Stormlight book. And then I plotted the first 5 to kind of be like, hey, let's get to the halfway point of the series and tie up some things and start to kind of propel us toward what the conflict for the next 5 are going to be. This is all a big balancing act. I'm really hoping it works, because Stormlight 5 is a very important book. I haven't been as worried for a book, I don't think, since I released the first Wheel of Time book, to see how people would respond to that. So don't worry, the beta readers are really liking it, but because of that, I've actually done way more beta reads on this book than I've ever done before. I will do a draft, get more people to read it, do a draft, get more people to read it. It is a lot of work, but I have now almost exactly like 1 month remaining, 1 month and change, to turn in the final draft, which I worked on the flight here, because it's very tight. What we are going to read to you today, so you can find online readings I've done from for Kaladin at the beginning of Stormlight 5. You can also find a few of the interludes. So what I have left that I haven't ever read is Shallan from the beginning of Stormlight 5, right? Now, this is the beginning, so it's gonna involve some setup that you're not gonna get payoff for until December. But I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna read for the next 38 minutes, which will probably take us through, my guess will be 2 Shalon sections at the start of the book. These are sandwiched between Kaladin sections that I've done readings from already, all right? And I think I'm gonna go sit up here for this, and hopefully I can juggle this and my water bottle, and we're just gonna do that. Let's see if I turn this sideways, will it go? Nope. Dropbox. All right. Shalon lingered atop lasting integrity, the great fortress of the honor spren, thinking about all the people she'd been, the way she changed based on perspective. Indeed, life was largely about perspective. Like this strange structure, a hollow rectangular block hundreds of feet tall, dominating Shadesmar's landscape. People, spren, lived along the inside walls, walking up and down them, ignoring conventions of gravity. Looking down along one of the inside walls could be stomach churning unless you changed your perspective. Unless you convinced yourself that walking up and down that wall was normal. Whether a person was strong or not wasn't usually subject to debate. Yet if gravity could be a matter of opinion, she turned away from the heart of lasting integrity and walked along the very top of the wall, looking out to survey Shadesmar, rolling ocean of beads in one direction, jagged obsidian highlands lined with crystalline trees in the other. On the wall with her, an even more daunting sight, 2 spren with heads made of geometric lines, each wearing a robe of some too stiff, glossy black material. 2 spren. She'd bonded 2, one during her childhood, one as an adult. She'd hurt the first and suppressed the memory. Shalon knelt down before Testament, her original spren. The cryptic sat with her back to the stone railing. The lines and pattern that made up her head were crooked, like broken twigs. In the center, the lines were scratched and rough, as if someone had taken a knife to them. More telling, her pattern was almost frozen. Nearby, Pattern's head pulsed like a vibrant heart, always moving, always forming some new geometric display. Comparing the two broke Shalon's heart. She had done this to Testament by rejecting the bond after using her shard blade to kill her mother. Testament reached out with a long-fingered hand, and Shalon, pained, took it. It gripped hers lightly, but Shalon got the sense that it was all the strength Testament had. Testament responded to being a Deadeye differently from Maya, who stood nearby with Adolin and Kolek. Maya had always seemed strong of body, even as a Deadeye. Spren broke in different ways, it appeared, just like people. Testament squeezed Shalon's hand again, bearing no expression but that torpid motion of lines. Why? Shalon asked. Why don't you hate me? Pattern rested his hand on Shalon's shoulder. We both knew the danger, the sacrifice, and bonding to humans again. I hurt her. Yet, here you are, Pattern said, able to stand tall, able to control the surges, able to protect the world. She should hate me, Shalon whispered, but there's no vitriol in the way she holds my hand, no judgment in the way she remains with us. Because the sacrifice was worth something, Shalon, Pattern said, uncharacteristically reserved. It worked. In the end, you recovered, did better. I am still here, and remarkably, I am not even a little bit dead. I do not think you will kill me at all, Shalon. I am very happy about that. Can I heal her? Shalon asked. Maybe if I bond her again? I think after talking to Kolek, Pattern said, I think you are still bonded to her. But Shalon looked over his shoulder at him. I broke the bond. That did this. Some breaks are messy, Pattern said. A slice with a sharpened knife is clean. A slice with a dull one is ragged. Your break, done by a child without full intent, is like the one ragged. In some ways, that makes it worse. But it does mean there is still some connection between you two. So no, Pattern said. I do not think merely saying words again would heal her. His head pattern spun a little more slowly, as if he were contemplating something profound. These numbers are unfamiliar, Shalon. Strange, irrational, in a sequence I do not understand. I mean, we are walking on unfamiliar ground. A better metaphor for you, yes. Unfamiliar ground. In the deepest part, In the deep past, Deadeyes did not exist. It was what they'd learned, in part, from the Honor Spren and from Maya. The Deadeyes, all of them except Testament, had been bonded to ancient radiance before the Recreants. Together, they'd rejected their oaths, human and Spren alike. They'd thought it would cause a painful but survivable split. Instead, something had gone terribly wrong. The result had been the Deadeyes. The explanation might lie with Kalek, the very person Shallan had been sent to Lasting Integrity to kill. She squeezed Testament's hand. "I'm going to help you," Shallan whispered, "whatever it takes." Testament didn't respond, but Shallan leaned in, wrapping her arms around the cryptic. Pattern's robe always felt hard, yet Testament's bent like cloth. "Thank you," Shallan said, "for coming to me when I was young. Thank you for protecting me. I still remember it. I still do not remember it all, but thank you." The cryptic slowly but deliberately put her arms around Shallan and squeezed back. "Rest now," Shallan said, wiping her eyes and standing up. "I'm going to figure this out." All right, I have to skip an insert from Kaladin that I've already read in that chapter and skip forward to the next Shallan. Oh, yes. Woo. Woo indeed. All right, this should be it. Shallan and Pattern left Testament to rest and crossed the wall at Lasting Integrity to meet with Adolin, Maya, and the Herald Kalek, who were speaking with a kind of spren that Kalek called a Sion. She manifests as a hovering ball of light, roughly the size of a head, with an odd symbol at the center. Other than them, the top of the wall top was empty this day. "You don't remember?" Pattern asked softly as he and Shallan walked. "The events with Testament? I thought you did. I thought with Vale gone." "Vale is not gone," Shallan said. "She's part of me, like she always was." "I don't understand." "It's hard to explain," Shallan said, "and I'm not sure I've entirely figured it out. Healing is not an event pattern, but a process. I've incorporated Vale into myself, so she doesn't take control any longer, but she's not gone. Vale is me, but Vale is not always Shallan." "But you are Shallan." "Imagine it," she said, as Vale moving to the back of the wagon as we ride toward the future. "She's still there, coaching me, and we're both aware of the world." There was more to it than that, of course. Shallan had projected some uncomfortable aspects of herself into Vale. Now she had to face them. She'd worried that Adolin would find it difficult, but, well, Adolin Khalin was storming wonderful. After the discussion last night, he seemed to understand. Together, they knew that there was work to do, but Shallan had taken an enormous step toward healing, and along with it, acknowledged something important. She didn't deserve hatred, but understanding. It was hard to believe, but Vale insisted they try anyway. "But," Pattern said, "Radiant is still separate?" "More separate," Shallan said. So still in the front of the wagon." "Yes, that might change. It might not need to change. I'm figuring this out as I go, Pattern, but I do feel better. More importantly, I no longer need Vale to stand between me and the memories." "So you do remember?" "Yes and no," Shallan said. "It's a jumble. I was young, and the events were traumatic, and there is so much pain associated with memories of my mother. I need time to process." Humans are squishy. Not just bodies, minds too. Memories too. Ideas too. He seemed pleased by that. As a child, she'd bonded to Spren, something her mother had not liked. A man had come, either to hurt Shallan or separate her from Testament. Her father had fought him, and during their struggle, Shallan's mother had come at her with a knife. In self-defense, Shallan had killed her mother with an early manifestation of Testament as a shard blade. Shallan, in trauma, had rejected her nascent oath and buried those memories. But if her bond with Testament had never been fully broken, what did that mean? And which memories of those days between her mother's death and the arrival of Pattern, which of those involved Testament? I knew I had a shard blade long before I had bought in Pattern. I thought about it in Carbranth. She convinced herself that the weapon belonged to her father and had been kept in his safe. She'd gone there before leaving and drawn it out to dismiss it, pretending it was an ordinary blade, pretending she had 10 seconds to summon it. However, a part of her had known even then it was Testament, a friend to whom she'd done great harm. That was the one thing Shallan clearly remembered. Testament was her friend, a dimpled pattern on the wall that had delighted, then engaged, then protected a young girl. Her spren had never been as talkative as Pattern. Indeed, Shallan could only remember rare, soft fragments of speech, encouraging her to stand against the darkness in her family. Shalon had loved her mysterious friend dearly. Though her memories were jumbled, the emotions shone through the pain. Strength could be a matter of perception sometimes, and today, Shalon found she could choose strength. They approached Adolin, Maya, and Kalek. Shalon still found it incredible that this man was one of the heralds of the Almighty. The short, balding fellow kept rubbing his hands together, as if washing them with an invisible soap and water. Adolin and Maya practically towered over him as they spoke to the ball of light. Maya was obviously paying attention. She wasn't completely healed. Her eyes were still scratched out, and her coloring wan brown instead of vibrant green like the others of her kind. But she was getting better. She no longer wandered off or just stared blankly during conversations. She was even starting to talk more here and there. I worry about what is to come, the ball of light was saying. It had transformed into an approximation of Wit's face, made all of soft white blue light, and spoke with his voice. The Spren was a way to contact him, as they've discovered a few days ago. The war is about to intensify, and all rests upon the contest of champions, Odium's chosen warrior against whomever old Dalinar chooses. Father will choose himself, Adolin said. When the Blackthorn needs to be certain something is done right, he will do it himself. Adolin paused, then glanced at Maya. Storm him, he's probably our best chance, though. Wit, Shalon said. It's really happening? It is indeed. The contest is set, contracts agreed to. Shalon, they've set it for 10 days from now. So soon? Shalon asked. Storms. Where? Urithiru, Adolin said, arms folded. They've already sent windrunners to get us, apparently. Should arrive today. Shalon chewed on that, trying not to feel emotional whiplash. It had taken weeks to reach lasting integrity, but windrunners could have them back to Urithiru within the day, depending on how much stormlight they'd brought. She found herself eager to return. She'd had enough of the honor spren and their elitism. She missed blue skies and plants that didn't crinkle when you touched them. Though Shadesmar had a sun, it was distant and cold. She could never thrive here. Plus, as she'd indicated to Testament, she had work to do. Wit, Shalon said, stepping closer. The glowing version of his face focused on her. My brothers are safe? You're certain? Very certain, brilliant one, he said back, soft. You're sure the Ghostbloods will move against you? Yes, she said. After a year and a half of flirting with the Ghostbloods, she'd finally stepped up and said no. Doing so, it essentially declared war on them. She found Adolin's hand for support. He knew the entire story now. Wit, I know their faces, their plans. I'm likely the greatest threat on the planet to their organization, and they've tried to kill Yasna for less. Everyone I love is in danger. I have to manage Dalinar and try to prepare him, Wit said, but I think I can help you as well. I've been watching Mraize's little crew. I'll send your people my drawings of their members. But take care, Shalon. I know this group and their leader. They can be brutal. As can I, Shalon whispered. She glanced to Kalek, who was staring out over the bead ocean, and the dead-eyed Spren who still stood on the shore. Despite him, she felt safe here with Pattern, Adolin, and Maya. Safe enough to voice it. Wit, I'm worried, though. Am I ready? I ask myself that same question now and then, he said. And Shalon, I'm 10,000 years old. During the trip, she said, I started to create a new persona, Wit. Formless. A version of me, but how did she explain it? A version of me with no face. A version of me who could do terrible things. I walked away from it, Wit, but that capacity is still inside of me. Shalon, he said, and she looked up, meeting his eyes. If it weren't for that capacity, then what good would choices be? If we never had the power to do terrible things, then what heroism would it be to resist? But did you turn it away? He asked, and Adolin squeezed her hand. Yes. Then heroism it is, Shalon. I'm remembering what I did to my mother, she said, and my father, and to a lesser extent, Tin, and now Mraize. I'm going to have to kill him, Wit. Is that my destiny, to kill every person who has ever mentored me? And that, finally, her fears found voice. Did it sound silly, foolish, ridiculous? This pattern she'd seen in her life? Wit did not laugh, though, and he considered himself an expert on what was ridiculous. Would that any of us, he said, could protect ourselves from the costs of heroism. But again, if there were no cost, no sacrifice, then would it be heroism at all? I cannot promise you that it will be easy, Shalon, but I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you, Radiant whispered. I'm proud of you. Vale, The part of her that was veil agreed. Thank you, she said. I have to go, Wit said, but I'll leave you with this. The Ghostbloods want something extremely valuable, and you have the key to it standing with you right now. If you want to destroy them, you might not need to kill every last one of them. Instead, you might just need a powerful leverage over them. The glowing sphere melded from his face back to a sphere. He's gone, the Spren said. I'm sorry. Wit's final words lingered with Shallan, reinforcing something she'd been considering. A way to protect Roshar from the Ghostbloods, and indeed, she knew what their next target was likely to be. They'd sent her to Lasting Integrity to get intel on one of the Unmade, and the Herald standing with her had the secrets they all wanted to know. I need, she said to Kalek, to know everything you know about Ba Edo Mishram. The Herald wrung his hands and looked to the side as if seeking to escape. We're not going to hurt you, Adolin said calmly. You know that by now. I do, Kalek said. It's just, I wasn't supposed to be involved. None of us are. I don't think the other heralds follow that, Shallan noted, folding her arms. What did you do, Kalek? Not much, he said, putting his hand to his head. I can't do much these days. I don't know why. I can't decide. He looked up at them, then formed fists, pulling them close up to his chest. I was at Uruthiro when the plan to capture Mishram was conceived. Then I joined them on their mission. I guess I'm the only one alive who actually knows what happened to her. That's why the Ghostbloods and their cursed Lord of Scars want me. Just tell us, Shallan said. Some of us learned you could capture Spren inside gemstones, he explained. And Mishram, for all her power, was a Spren. The Radiants prepared a flawless Heliodor, the color of sunlight, and they trapped her inside. And then they hid her prison, not in the physical realm and not in Shadesmar. He bit his lip between his teeth, then forced out another part. In the spiritual realm, Mishram, Milishi hid it there. How? Shallan asked, sharing a look with Adolin. I don't know, Kalek said, backing away. I promise you I don't know. But now they'll send more people for me, won't they? They'll trap me in a gemstone, or they think they'll be able to. He looked to the two of them, wide-eyed, and fled toward the way down. None of them gave chase. This was, unfortunately, usual behavior for Kalek. Maya grunted softly, watching him go. He's gotten a lot worse, she said. Shallan started. You knew him? Met him a few times, Maya said, then took a deep breath. Never thought much of him, even then. Well, Shallan said, we know something more about Mishram, at least. Her prism is part of what Mraize has been hunting for a long time now, I suspect. Might need to find it first before he can do so. Ba Edo Mishram, Adolin said, thoughtful, leaning back against the wall's battlements. The most powerful of the Unmade. What would the Ghostbloods want with her, though? Pattern said. Power. So much power. She was nearly a god. She bonded the singers once. Could Mraize be wanting to do something similar? Shallan shivered, considering and thinking of Mraize and his master Ayatul, somehow commanding the entirety of the enemy army. Was that possible? Whatever the reason, Shallan said, I have to stop him. Her prison is in the spiritual realm, though, Adolin said, frowning. What does that even mean? Pattern said. It means we will never be able to find it. Surely it's possible, Shallan said. If the ancient radiants put it there, we should be able to take it out. You don't understand, Pattern said, holding hands apart and gesturing in his way. You think Shadesmar is odd, yes? Black sky, little sun, Pattern with arms and legs for perambulating. His head spun a little faster. The spiritual realm is stranger by orders of magnitude. It is a place where the future blends with the present. The past echoes like the striking of a clock. Time and distance stretch like numbers infinitely repeating. It is where gods live and even baffles some of them. Shallan took that in, then glanced at Testament, huddled in the shadow of the wall further back along the walk. Our best guess, she said, is that the Deadeyes were created because Mishram was imprisoned, right? Agreed, Pattern said. Mishram became like a god to the singers, the Parshmen. She connected to Shar, and echoes of that filtered to the Spren. Ah, so wonderfully odd. Her imprisonment is the reason broken bonds now have such an effect on the Spren. It's because, Maya said, humans have no honor. The god, I heard that the Mishram had been captured. I heard that the Radiants would destroy the world. That is why I decided it was done. She shook her head. I don't know it all. I'd like to, considering what breaking the bond did to me. That day, the day Mishram had been captured, something deeper had happened, an event connecting humankind, honor, Spren, and the bonds. We need to figure out how Mishram or a prison has power over bonds, Shallan said, looking to Pattern. We need to go into the spiritual realm and find that prison, however difficult it is. His Pattern slowed. Then finally, he laced his fingers together. Very well. Though you know what I said when I said I was sure you wouldn't get me killed? Yes. I should like, he declared, to make a retraction. And that is the first of the 2 chapters. I'm going to get you one more. So, scrolling past Kaladin, chatting with Wit as well. You can read that scene online. I think I read that at Dragonstill last year. Yep. Nice little goofy conversation. Well, long, goofy conversation, considering how far I have to scroll. All right. Here we go. It was nice for Shallan to take a few hours to think for once. Sitting, wearing a bright blue hava rather than her traveling clothing, settled at the top row of the stone open-air forum within lasting integrity, drawing. How long had it been since she'd simply let herself draw? How long had it been since she'd sketched a little during her trip, but that felt like an eternity ago. She relaxed, flowing with the drawing, a depiction of the vertigo she felt looking up along the inside walls of lasting integrity. A surreal painting, like something from one of the older art movements, where perspective was intentionally alien and off-putting. She liked to think that the old surrealists had made contact with Spren and Shadesmar, warping their minds to new ways of seeing things. Though she'd never been quite as good with landscapes as she was with people, she was proud of the sense her sketch gave of falling, yet into what? You could not see, because the unnatural perspective held your eyes upward. Like others she'd done today, a strange face kept sneaking into the art. In this case, she'd absently warped the shadings of one wall into that face. Feminine, a singer with angular carapace and shadows and curves forming a strata-like design on her face. Shallan flipped through her sketchbook. Each drawing done today had that singer face hidden somewhere, and she didn't remember making them. She'd done something similar at Erethiru, where the presence of an unmade had warped her sketches. She tried not to let it disturb her quite so much this time. Then it had been a message. Was there a similar one now? She looked toward Adolin, who paced at the center of the forum, a place where just a few days before he'd been on trial. Today he'd been joined by Godeki, a lanky edge dancer. Shallan's agents had joined them as well, Ishna, Vatha, and Beryl, along with their cryptics. Together they waited for the Windrunners and for the fruits of some final efforts in lasting integrity. She started another sketch as they waited. In the end, 12 arrived. 12 honor spren from a population of hundreds. That was how many showed up in response to Adolin's call to arms. He and Godeki greeted each one with a smile, but she knew he'd expected more. One other did arrive, Nodam. The former sea captain still had his unique facial hair, though he walked on unsteady feet. They still didn't know why he'd been assaulted by those Tukari that Adolin had saved him from. Nodam didn't join Godeki and Adolin, but instead walked down the steps to join Shallan. Radiant Kholin, he said. That was still odd to hear, even a year after the wedding. It hadn't been assumed that she would take Adolin's name. Among the Alethi Lighties, either party was equally likely to take their name or keep their name as adopt a new one. In her case, she was needed in the Kholin line of succession. She doubted she'd take a throne that Adolin had turned down, but Dalinar wanted people he trusted in line. Her adoption into the Kholin house would strengthen their claim, should it come to that. In explaining this to her, Dalinar and Navani had been speaking pragmatically, but Shallan knew she remembered that day differently. For her, it was the day when a set of parents had, for the first time, wanted her. Nodam settled down beside her. Your mission was a success. 12 new Radiants. We expected more, though, Radiant said, emerging. After the support Adolin got at the trial, I anticipated an excellent recruitment effort. A good number of the honor friends support him, Nodam said, but that doesn't mean they want to be bonded. One can be irate at the honor spend leadership and think humans are deserving of support without wanting to take that step. Down below, the 12 honor spren started to fade. I've never seen this before, Nodam added. I thought they'd go in a blink. Instead, they fade away to nothing. Not nothing, Radiant said. They'll appear on the other side. I hear it's traumatic, Nodam said. He had a stiff, formal way of speaking, even when the words were casual, clipping each word as if he were making an announcement from the quarterdeck of a ship. Spren on the other side forget themselves. Only briefly, Radiant said. These will probably stay in a group, which helps, and immediately make their way to Earth Zero, drawn by the squires training them. Do you even need them now, though? Nodham asked. Isn't the war soon to end? Windrunners are our primary method of traveling long distances, and I suspect they'll be helpful in peacetime. Beyond that, even if Dalendar wins the contest, I worry about what is to come next. I think the more radiance we have, the more stable our position will be. Then I should hurry, Nodham said, standing, to join them so that I'm not left alone. Radiant approved, but Shallan, she noticed something. You sound reluctant, Shallan said. He looked at her, glowing the same soft blue of all the honor spren. His uniform, his hair, everything about him was made of the same soft light. Solid, not transparent, but also not quite real in the way she understood reality. There is nothing more for me here, Nodham said. I've been rejected of mine, and seen their pettiness. I should like to be of service. Though, I admit, I do not wish to bond a human. I loathe the idea. Is that petty of me in turn? Absolutely not, Shallan said. I have 2 bonds, Nodham, and understand the cost better than most. It's not pettiness or even cowardness to be hesitant. It's just like it's not cowardly or petty to reject any relationship. Pardon, Nodham said, but other sorts of relationships don't lead to soldiers with remarkable powers. That did admittedly complicate the matter, but after learning what she'd done to Testament, who sat with Pattern a few rows down, Shallan couldn't help but question their mission itself. They needed windrunners, yes, but it made her increasingly uncomfortable to demand that a spren bond. It wasn't intimate in the traditional human sense of the world, but it's felt as deeply personal. We can use every windrunner, yes, she said, but I don't think you should force yourself to bond a human if that makes you uncomfortable. You can be a good person and say no, Nodham. I've learned that. Perhaps, Nodham said. Perhaps I will stay a little longer here, then. With effort, I might persuade others of my kind to offer you support. He pointed and drew her attention to a group of honor spren walking past, wearing traveling clothing and carrying gear. As if to leave on a long hike, they waved to Shallan and Adolin, but did not join those fading away. Objectors? Shallan asked as Adolin waved back to them. Those you mentioned earlier? Yes. They don't agree with how you were treated, but also don't want to go to war. They leave lasting integrity to make their own way. She nodded. Well, Radiant Godeki is staying to continue to normalize relations with the honor spren, and I might leave one of my agents as well. If you stay, that would help. They could use a solid ally here. I am your ally, he said, but as I warned you, the honor spren leadership does not care for me, even if they have been forced to revoke my exile. His expression grew distant. We have an entire navy that once sailed the Bead Ocean. It is a shame to see those boats abandoned in the shipyards. He gives the enemy full control of Shadesmar seas. Perhaps I could sail under honor spren authority again. Storms. If Shallan hadn't said anything, Nodham might have actually gone to become a Radiant spren, meaning she'd just actively gone against their orders in coming here. Perhaps she wouldn't mention that part in her report to Dalinar. No other spren came. Lucindia, the spren who had been Shallan's guide since her arrival at Lasting Integrity, made no appearance. Shallan had hoped she would change her mind despite their occasional clashes. Nodham, Shallan said, thank you for how you stood up for us during the trial. I am one person stretched thin, Radiant Kholin, he said, standing with his hands clasped behind his back, like colors on the mast which have waved too long in the wind. I don't know what I believe or trust any longer, but what was done to you was not right. I could not play the sham role they demanded of me. I ask your forgiveness for even considering it. It was natural to want your own life back, Nodham. He turned to her, blue eyes meeting hers. I lay on the ground, battered and assaulted, and watched your husband rise in my defense against overwhelming odds. He saved me with no expectation of reward. In that moment, I knew that honor lived. He nodded curtly to Shallan, then walked down the steps to talk with Adolin. Shallan slowly turned back to her sketch, where she soon found that she'd drawn yet another face, in Adolin's shadow. Storms. Don't be unnerved, she thought. You were upset when you drew Pattern for the first time back in Kharbranth, but look how that turned out. She would not be afraid of her own art. She gritted her teeth and forced herself to flip to the next sheet and start drawing again, till someone else settled down beside her. Collect leaned forward, hands clasped, singing small and fragile. I'm not going with you, he said softly. I can't. It's not safe for you here, Shalon said, sketching, fingers moving as if of their own accord. If I got to you, Mraze's other assassins can do so. I will hide. Better. But I can't leave the Sion, and she can't travel right now. It wouldn't be good for her. Shalon didn't argue. It never seemed to work with Kalek. Instead, she lost herself in a sketch of him, a herald to add to her collection. She might have said this was the rarest of gems to obtain, but was a herald equally rare, actually rarer than anyone else? One might say, because of their immortality, they were less so. We are broken, Shalon, Kalek finally said. We are not the heroes you wish us to be, not anymore. I know how that feels. I don't think you do, he said, wrapping his arms around himself. I don't believe anyone does. He looked to Adolin, chatting with Nodum and Godeki. You're really going to try to find Mishram? If I don't, Shalon said, my enemies will. Then what? He said. Will you release her? I cannot decide, always cannot decide. I have preached for her freedom in the past, but now I worry. She might join in strength and odium. She hates humans. He put his hand to his head. Shar says all the unmade should be contained, yet what we did to the singers by imprisoning her. I'll worry about that when we find her gemstone, Shalon said. Honestly, I'll probably bring it back to the bondsmiths and let everyone decide together. He didn't decide to respond, so she continued drawing. This familiar sound of charcoal pencil on paper, the distilled attention of creation, like the most potent of alcohol. She attracted a few creation spren, like little swirling lights. These ones, though, behaved oddly. And here, she'd never seen them change shape like they did in the physical realm, but these started adopting the look of her pencil and eraser. She kept drawing, lines imitating life, freeing it, but altering it at the same time. You could never make an exact copy. That wasn't the point. Every sketch was a picture of the artist as well, their perspective, their emphasis, their instinct, reclaiming a moment otherwise lost. Once you got to the end, it was sublime. That moment when you basked in the thing you'd created, the feeling of awe mixed with disbelief that this beautiful object had come from you, accompanied by the slightest worry that, because if you didn't understand how you did it, you maybe didn't deserve to have been part of the creation. She loved the feeling, even the uncertainty of it. Radiant, Kalek said, hands clasped as he stared down at the stone floor of the amphitheater. What do you fear? What kind of question was that? I don't know, she lied. I fear options, he said. I see every choice I make, and I see the terrible results that could stem from them. If I stay here, I see you fail without me. If I go, I see my presence, broken as I am, cause your failure. I cannot continue. I do not. She rested her hand on his, then handed him the sketch. He took the picture, frowning. Then his eyes widened as he saw it depicting him standing tall, wearing robes and striding from a fanciful city with colorful walls and strange trees with long fronds she'd made up. He carried a staff with an odd shape at the top and strode toward the glowing light on the horizon, though in the picture he looked backward and his face was determined, decisive. Do you often do this? He asked. Sketch people? She said, then blushed. Yes, I kind of do it all the time, when I'm feeling like myself at least. Not simply sketching, child. Do you often draw upon fortune, glimpse someone's possible selves, then pull one forth, touch in some way what could have been, what might still be? He glanced at her and must have seen the utter confusion in her eyes as he sighed. Is this a skill commonly employed by light weavers during your time? Not that I know of, she said, but I don't exactly understand what you're saying. He glanced toward Pattern and Testament. To Spren. Of course, you've bonded too. Strange things happen when a Nihil bond is imbricated. There were rules against it once, I believe. How long have you had them both? For some time, she said. Though I didn't know it, I didn't remember it until just recently. And how often, he asked, holding up the sheet, do you glimpse into the spiritual realm, then manifest it in your art? She thought back to pictures she'd done, like one found in the pocket of a dead man, like sketches of the unmade lurking Erythero, or faces turning up in her art without her intending to draw them. She began to feel like a fool for objecting so quickly to someone who obviously knew far more about these things than she did. It might happen now and then, she said. There was an unmade at Erythero, and it showed up in my art. Now these faces. She turned one toward him. He nodded. Because you've been thinking about traveling to the spiritual realm and finding Ba-Adom Mishram. That's her. One interpretation of her, yes, he said. If you were someone else, I would assume you had seen some ancient art and were unconsciously influenced by it. For you, he shrugged. Fortune can do unthought, fantotic things. I'm sorry, fantotic? It means unnerving, he said. I'm sorry. I don't keep up on shifts in language, nor am an expert on fortune. Best speak to Midius, your wit, about that. And fantotic man himself, that one. I will stop there. It's not the end of the chapter, but we're about out of time. So there we go. Thank you for coming out to see me. Thanks for stopping by the booth, playing the little game we have set up there. We're testing out doing some things. With Dragonsteel every year, we do some sort of game for people who are there. We're trying one at our booth. It's not very extravagant, but it's the beginning ages of that. Appreciate you, as always, supporting me. We will stick this up online if you want to see it again, and we'll probably put up the text so you can read it without having to hear me stumble over words now and then. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing those of you who have tickets at the signing line. I'm going to head there right now. So.